But what, from a purely scientific point of view, gives us some sort of hope that this kind of inner and outer correspondence can actually happen. There are a number of scientific and mathematical and inventing discoveries that have been made by people using insights from dreams or semi-asleep kind of states. So it's by no means something which is entirely foreign to the Enlightenment project or scientific discovery. In a practical sense, it's something that can often be at the very core of, or the most difficult part of a scientific project, which is what question you investigate in the first place, which sort of determines whatever else that follows. So let's see. So from those examples, there's examples like Kekule, who discovered the structure of the benzene atom from a dream. Lowy, who won the 1936 medicine prize for medical Nobel Prize. So if we have these isolated examples, the question would be, is there any way that we can make it into a repeatable and reliable kind of observation rather than simply a once off or twice off kind of thing? Because just winning a Nobel Prize is not the kind of thing you can repeatedly achieve, presumably. So that's the aim of the second part, is how to put this idea that the dream mirrors the reality of the outer reality of the dreamer. Trying to put that on a repeatable, or find somewhere where that is repeated, to be able to put that on a repeatable correspondence and not one that's just happening in a once-off scenario like a discovery. So let's see. So we've discarded the causal possibility. We're now looking at the acausal possibility. So as we said, it starts with the instinct equals archetype equation, and then we're trying to look at the same experience from both sides at once. So like we saw before from the first therapeutic part, what we're trying to do is look at something from both sides at once. So we have this idea in Jungian psychology of an experience spectrum, where you have the instinct on one side, which is supposed to equal the archetype or the numinous experience on the other. So in fact what we're trying to do is find those kind of experiences where they can be observed both from without by your empirical measurement and from within by looking at your dream symbolism. So this is what I'm calling the dual perspective. So looking at the same lived experience from within via the dream symbolism, and from without by measuring those bodily changes like you have in pregnancy. So, this, I'd like to suggest, this dual perspective is a special case of what's called in philosophy of science shared observation. So shared observation is an acausal method of validating a new method of observation. Now, one historical example of that is with Galileo, with his use of the telescope. So Galileo himself had no causal theory of how a telescope worked. All he knew was that it actually worked, and he worked out his observations without knowing exactly how it worked. And that optical theory was developed by Kepler and later by Newton. But he himself had no idea. So how did he convince his contemporaries that this telescope stuff wasn't just illusions, as his critics charged him, or how did he show that it was actually a true method of observation? So what he used is this method of shared observation. So you find one particular phenomenon that can be observed from both methods of observation once. One that's already established and socially accepted as true, and one via the new untested method of observation. Then you observe from both perspectives on this same phenomenon that falls between the two, And then if the data correlates reliably, then that verifies or justifies your new method of observation. So an example would be Galileo would look at a tower, and that's off in the distance, and his mate, the critic there, would say, no, your telescope's just an illusion. But Galileo would read off the tower, Luigi's special of the day, and then, okay, he's a spag bowl or whatever, and then his mate says, I don't believe you. So he runs up to the tower, has a look, sure enough, it's Luigi's special of the day. So, and he comes back, Galileo, I'm very sorry, da 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 da. So what you're doing is you're looking at the same phenomenon that you can observe from both sides, and then because you're looking at it from one and the other, and they can say it's the same thing, it's validating Galileo's telescope. Or another example I used was in Venice. He got up on top of the tower and looked at the ships that were coming in, and he could tell them which ship it was and so on and so forth before it was visible with the naked eye. So by using those kinds of shared observations, he was able to verify what he claimed was a new method of observation, but which his critics thought wasn't originally. So it's exactly the same kind of shared observation that I'm proposing here. Another example of the same thing was the first use of radars for radio telescopes after the Second World War. So up to 1952, there's quite a nice quote from one of the astronomers working at the time, where they said there's where are we? Yeah. So originally they were looking at the oh, there we go. So you had one set of optical telescopes which were already established, and then you had this new radio telescope data. But up until, so from say 46, the end of the war, up until 52, they had two separate sets of data, but no way of correlating the two. So it looked at that time, before it was verified, as if there were two separate universes with no necessary way of joining or correlating the two. So it's quite a nice quote. An astronomer working at the time said, around 1950 there appeared to be an optical universe and a radio universe which were utterly different, but which coexisted. So what I'd like to suggest is, at the moment, in terms of Jungian psychology, we can say that there's an inner universe and an outer universe which both coexist, but at the moment in Western culture we don't really know how to put them together, which in turn creates a whole lot of social problems and what have you. But that's sort of at the core of what I'm trying to get to here. So I'd suggest we're at the same stage now. We have sort of outer data and inner data, but we're not yet at a point where we can correlate the two. So that's what we're trying to do here. So the first step, like Luigi's specials, is to find that thing or the phenomenon that's in the overlap that you can observe from both methods of observation. So that the tried and tested one, and then your new one, which in this case is this idea of Jung's, that the mirror of the dreams faithfully reflects the dream's reality. So the question for us now is, what are those phenomena in the overlap? So what I'd like to suggest that one of those is the pregnancy process. So in a kind of formulaic way, it could be expressed this way, that the change in the body is to the change in the dream imagery over this time of pregnancy, lactation, weaning and post-weaning. So sort of as a formula, that's how you'd set out what we're trying to compare. So what are the bodily changes, what are the dream symbolism changes over that period of time? So you've got your 9 months gestation, however long the lactation is, and then weaning for a shorter lactation, because in some cultures breastfeeding can go on for a number of years. As we'll see in a minute, for these purposes it'd be better to look at maybe, I'm guessing a bit, but I think probably 6 months to a year kind of breastfeeding rather than hear stories in Japan of sort of like 14 or whatever years.
Yeah.
So I'm told, I don't know.
So,
I wasn't there.
so with the lag that you're talking about between the dream and the bodily manifestation,
Oh, the lag?
yeah, time lag.
Oh, well, I don't know that there necessarily should be. I think the idea would be that it would be at the same time. I think what there can be a lag with is the problem, the dream symbolism will turn up at the time, but if you're talking about a medical problem, then I think it can become evident later. So there would be a lag there, but in terms of the actual physical change, so for example, when your estrogen level goes up, you should see a dream reflecting that at the same time. So in that sense, there won't be a lag. Yeah, and I think, yeah, so there you'd say where at each stage of this pregnancy process, you'd have a corresponding dream theme for that particular week of gestation or a week post-birth, postpartum for breastfeeding, what have you. So, yeah, so that's, if you like, as a sort of formula where that change in the body corresponds to the quantitative established measurement, and the change in dream imagery corresponds to the new hypothesised method of observation using the Jungian idea. So let's see. So yeah. So I think there. So yeah. So how would you actually carry out the experiment, I suppose, is the question at this stage, if that's the theory of how you do it. A bit like we saw before with the pilot study, you'd need quite a number of women to be writing down their dreams, because at each stage here, you'd expect a common dream theme, but I think as I perhaps hinted, the dream symbolism won't be exactly the same from one woman to another, or indeed from one culture to another. So for example, if you've got the mother archetype, you know, in ancient Egypt it would have been Isis, or in Mesopotamia it would be Astarte or whatever. So you've got in different cultures, or in Latin America it could be Our Lady of the Flowers or whatever it is. So in different cultures you'll have different, what's called inflections of the same archetype or the same basic theme. So you'd want to be looking not only across quite a number of women within one culture, but indeed, to do it properly, you'd be looking across different cultures. So it is quite a project, but I think even with a relatively small number, you'd still be hitting the same basic archetypes at each stage of the pregnancy.